A decade into the age of 4K Ultra HD gaming, and you'd think by now it would be a little more common. Still, even though 8K and even 12K exist for those with IRL infinite money hacks and presumably incredible eyesight, 4K still remains a peak relatively few PC gamers attempt to climb. Maybe it's the allure of higher refresh rates at 1080 and 1440, maybe it's the lack of decently priced 4K graphics cards, or maybe people just don't see the point. Still, after 10 years, some of the early titles of the UHD era might just be lightweight enough that they can be played on less exotic hardware. Maybe some of them don't need a graphics card at all. Despite the remarkably cheeky, one might even say deceptive naming, none of Intel's UHD graphics iGPUs are up to the challenge of running games at actual UHD resolutions. Maybe some of the new Iris Xe models would have enough horsepower for this test, but, well, I don't own one. What I do have is an AMD Ryzen 5 5600G with Vega 7 graphics. As I've shown already this year, with a good overclock and some relatively high bandwidth RAM, this APU can achieve high refresh rates at 720, 900, even 1080 in some esports titles, though it did come to my attention that not every AM4 motherboard has a 144Hz enabled video output, and that's not the easiest spec to research either. Bit of a rookie mistake on my part, that one. Still, the vast majority of APU-compatible motherboards can output 4K at 60Hz, so I think I'm on steadier ground here. The test platform remains the same as usual. I'm using VSR to simulate 4K, and I'm capturing at 1080 because my past attempts to record 4K on my AliExpress special capture box look like a high-speed PowerPoint. The games being tested are, well, they're not new, per se. In fact, some of you were in school when these games came out, and some are actually older than 4K itself. You can probably run the original 3D GTA games in 4K on this system with little or no trouble at all. In fact, the only one I had any doubts about was GTA 4. GTA 5 was borderline. I had to drop quality settings to normal across the board, and the frame rate was not one I'd call smooth. Still, it looks okay. In fact, it's probably not far from what Xbox One X and PS4 Pro owners saw, and as 27 FPS average is nothing to turn your nose up at. Mass Effect is my definition of old but gold. Starting it up for the first time in a while, you forget just how polished it was. In my opinion, the human models are pretty incredible for the 2000s, easily up there with Half-Life 2. Of course, there are remasters now, which are probably a better bet for anyone with a decent GPU. Amazon Prime customers got the Legendary Collection for free on Prime Day, and it's included with Game Pass too. Still, the original version still exists, and this APU can run it at 4K at a very cinematic frame rate, but not without significant drops. But other than being a bit annoying, they don't do much to harm the gameplay experience overall. The only gripe I have is a natural side effect of Mass Effect's age. The textures, even set to high, are clearly not designed to be viewed at this resolution. There's a user mod that might improve this, though I haven't tried it personally. Another game that predates the 4K standard, Bioshock is a lot of fun to play and has a great visual style but isn't up to the standards of the 2016 remaster. In this instance, at high settings, the 4K resolution does the job of a good quality anti-aliasing filter, making polygons look sharp and without jagged edges, but revealing the low resolution of the textures. Still, they look a damn sight better than playing Call of Duty Warzone on anything below 6 gigs of RAM, and the frame rate is a pretty acceptable 50 FPS. It seems rare to even think about the base 2012 version of Skyrim these days. When the internet talks about Bethesda's ubiquitous RPG, it's usually either regarding some insane modding project or how it's been ported to yet another unlikely device. This then isn't the remastered version, and it hasn't been modded at all. This is base Skyrim running at 2160 high at a little over 30 FPS. It's not a bad experience at all, though some effects like water can be a little more demanding and cause drops into the low 20s. You knew it was coming. Yep, it can run Crysis. This is Crysis Warhead, the expandalone that is a little easier to launch on modern systems than the base game, and that doesn't quite take as long to get into the action, but it's the same CPU and GPU intensive Crysis experience. If you need proof of that, look no further than the FPS results at the mainstream preset, which I believe was named that by Crytek in order to more overtly neg customers into upgrading their PC. 32 FPS isn't unplayable, but it's not a great first-person shooter experience, and whether down to the high resolution or low settings, the draw distance for shadows and high-quality grass and vegetation assets is pretty damn near. Arguably, I could have run Rocksteady's Arkham City at a lower quality preset than high. As it was, I only saw 25 FPS on average, with dips below 20 from time to time. But, you know, if I were making a common sense video, I wouldn't be running the game at 4K in the first place. Arkham City looks pretty great at these settings, and even in the low 20s, the game never really felt unresponsive. If Deathloop whet anyone's appetite for more arcane games, and you haven't played 2012's Dishonored yet, you really should. It's on Games Pass now, and it's not that expensive on Steam either. Graphically, it has a unique painterly art style that somehow reminds me of Disco Elysium, and as such, it's not the hardest game to run, even at high resolutions and quality settings. FPS runs close to the 50 mark most of the time, though dips into the 30s in more complex scenes. Although there's not much of the Crytek DNA left in the Far Cry franchise, Far Cry 3 still managed to be one of the most demanding games in 2012. As such, it still presents a huge challenge for the 5600G. 4K at anything above the low preset resulted in sub-20 FPS averages. Low still looks pretty reasonable, but again, this is probably the wrong compromise to be making in this setup. I don't think it's controversial to say that 23 FPS in a first-person shooter isn't really a good idea. I thought about trying one of the original Source 2 games like Half-Life 2, Portal or Team Fortress 2, but I settled on Black Mesa, mainly because the idea of trying to use the menus on those old games at 4K gave me a headache just thinking about it. When I first booted the game up, anything above the medium preset was running below 30 FPS, but on reflection I should probably have waited a while, as things actually picked up a little and the 4K medium test ended up at around 40 FPS on average. I gave a bit more time to Dirt 3 than I usually do. I guess I just didn't want to be defeated by what is one of the twitchiest steering setups I've ever played with in my life. Seriously, straight lines were a challenge, and the flashback option is basically useless. I guess what I'm saying is, don't play Dirt 3, but I wanted an early 2010s racing game to break up the pacing of this video a little. If you have a better tolerance than I do for this, or maybe you have a racing wheel rather than a controller, have at it. Go nuts. It even runs pretty well at 4K, averaging well over 40 FPS at high settings, and looks quite fantastic, with the possible exception of the brown colour tint and copious amounts of bloom, as was the style at the time. I've got to admit, I've never really given Fallout a chance. Fallout 3 and New Vegas came out at a time when I was addicted to an MMORPG, and offline games just couldn't hold my attention. I bought Fallout 4, but it never really hooked me. When it came to benchmarking New Vegas for this video, I guess I was surprised how engaged I became. Like so many other titles featured today, I could have happily sat and played for hours, and just forgotten about the video altogether. It also looks pretty sweet, which is weird because I kind of associate old Bethesda games with looking ugly, but at 4K high, limited to using the controller and relying on VATs more than I expected I would, 38 FPS is more playable than you might think. Finally, I wanted to include something modern, even if it meant doing something really stupid. For some reason, you can play Fortnite in performance mode at 4K. I don't know why you would. I can see two good reasons to play Fortnite in performance mode, and neither one of them is to run on a 4K display at full resolution without render scaling. It doesn't make sense. It isn't a great time. It's close to 60 FPS on average, but with the expected Fortnite stutters, it just isn't smooth. So, what have we learned today? Was this a practical guide? Something you might want to do with your own Ryzen APU? Well, no. Absolutely not, in fact. This was just a bit of nostalgia and a reminder of how far technology can come in just a short time. A decade since the birth of 4K gaming, it seems like an unnecessary luxury that most gamers will probably never indulge in, but progress has still been made. In 2012, some of these games required top-of-the-line GPUs, sometimes more than one, to get playable results, and 4K 60Hz over an HDMI cable wouldn't even be a thing for a couple more years. That this is possible on integrated graphics at all in 2022 is no small thing, and it makes you wonder, 4 years from now, will we be playing Witcher 3 at 4K on an iGPU? Or will integrated graphics plateau? Let me know your thoughts down below. While you're down there, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.